and I've got a visual feast for you. We're going to go through these 5 examples, and they're based on real recent projects, though the data is fictitious. Top left is something called a market risk back chart. We'll explain why that is an important chart in banking, and why, although you can build a beautiful chart with Power BI, why you might want to build it using Power BI and R together. That's our starter. A kind of main course in this visual feast is top right here. This is data from the European Banking Authority about the stress test last year of European banks. The problem here that the EBA has is, how do you communicate really important but complex financial information to a broad audience? And we'll have a look at some ideas of doing that. Bottom left is looking at a visual that we did for program managers of a large project. And that was a how do we see both the detail and the overview? How do we see the wood and the trees? And we'll talk about how we did that. That's a visual built in R and delivered through Power BI. Bottom middle is a very kind of specific industry standard chart in operational risk, and quite difficult to do. So we'll talk about how we implemented these actual specific requirements. It's called an operational risk RCSA, risk and control assessments chart. The final chart is one that many of you might have seen, because it's a Power BI implementation of the famous Hans Rosling chart, which has been seen on TED and that had about 10 million views, which is kind of 200 years in 200 countries, 200 years in 4 minutes, and it shows how longevity and wealth has increased over the last 200 years by country. The interesting thing there is not just the visual. We can build a visual very easily in Power BI, but in preparing the data, and hope with that to show the power of the query editor. So that's our agenda. At the end, I'll just talk about a sneak preview of a talk I'm going to give, another webinar I'm going to give in 6 days' time, which is all to do with text analysis of financial documents, and I'll talk about that as well just for a couple of minutes. So let's get started. And yes, first of all, who am I? I'm a freelance data scientist based in London. More interesting than that is that if you are in and around London or passing through London, I run a very popular data analytics meetup. It's called London Business Analytics Group. We have talks every month. They're free to everybody. They're in central London. They're on an evening, weekday evening, and we don't take it all too seriously. We have the talk for 6:30, finishes by 7:15, and then I've arranged for some drinks. So it's all good. And next week we're actually having 2. The first one is this chap Mark Dodd. He runs a consultancy called Consolidator, and he'll be talking about R. So in fact, I've got about 200 people signed up at the moment for that. If you're not in London, which unfortunately most of you are, then a lot of the talks, if we're in a particular location, we do record them, and they go on a website called Skills Matter, really high quality recordings, and the link to that is in that blog there. So you can watch the recordings if you want to. So that's a bit about me. So let's get started, and I wanted to talk about the back test, and what I will do is I will bring up one. Let me just do that, and let me just go to showing screen 2. Lovely. So now you should be seeing a Power BI visual, and it's a market risk back test. And let me just, if I can, I'll just move that a bit over here. So you should see a market risk back test. What is this chart? Let me very quickly explain it. So on the x-axis we've got dates, and we've got looking at, in fact, 2 years worth of dates there, from the beginning of 2014 to the end of 2015. This is as of the end of 2015. On the y-axis, we've got P&L, revenue in pounds or dollars, in fact, in this case, in millions of pounds. What we're doing is we're looking at a particular trading division of an investment bank, in this case, Global Equities Electronics, so we can obviously change it and have a look at something else, another desk, another book, and we're looking at 2 sets of numbers. Those little bars there, that's the P&L that this desk, Convertible Asia Autos, makes on a particular day. And so you can see that sometimes it makes a profit, sometimes it makes a loss, but on the whole, let's hope that on average it makes a profit. The lines that you see, the kind of horizontal lines, squiggly lines you can see on there, are something called the VAR envelope. VAR stands for value at risk. And this is a really important chart, one that we produce for the regulators every day for every book. And what we have to do at the beginning of the day is that we have to say, we promise to the regulators that the P&L will be within that VAR envelope, within those two lines, 99 times out of 100. So we're allowed on average 2 or 3 days a year when it's not. When it's not, we have a breach, and those breaching that red line are those red lines. Obviously, this particular one is for effect. There's a lot more red lines than there should be. There should be 2 or 3 a year. We've probably got 20 or 30. The regulators make us do this because they want banks to kind of earn consistent profits and not have wild fluctuations of swing. So it's a really important chart. As I said, it's a financial chart, it's a regulatory chart. And we can build it very beautifully as well in Power BI, and this is exactly it. You can see that what we've got here is, if I come over here, you can see that we've got a line and combo chart. And what I've done is I've taken my P&L, I've got a data set which is simply for every book, and there's 27 books for every date in those years, 700 dates. I've got the P&L and the VAR, quite a simple data set, and so we can very nicely visualize it, putting data on the axis. We do a quick calculation to distinguish between those P&Ls which are inside and outside the VAR. That's a simple column calculation, DAX calculation, and that's because we put them in different colors, blue inside, red outside. And if this where we haven't got a VAR, because VAR at the early stages, VAR looks, you have to have 100 days of data before you can calculate the VAR. It kind of uses a statistical measure that uses that. It put it in grey. And this is a perfect chart. I think it's very good, and most people would be very pleased with the chart. But regulators aren't most people. They actually demand a chart that looks a bit like this. And you might say, what is the difference? And to all intents and purposes, it looks almost exactly the same. The only difference is that instead of having those lines, we have this translucent green area for the VAR envelope. A cosmetic detail and not an important detail. In fact, I prefer the first one, but this is what the regulators want. Now, unfortunately, until June of last year, there was no way that we could actually produce this with the standard visuals. So we had to do an R visual, and what I've done here, if I click on the R visual, is instead of having a standard visual, I've got an R visual, and then what I put is in my data set, I put the values, the columns that I want to keep, want to use in that R visual, and that's then Power BI presents those to my R script. I've got a little R script here that I've cut and pasted in as a data set, a kind of R's equivalent of a table, and then I just use a little bit of R here. You can see it's a call to a famous graphics package. That graphic package allows me to do, it's very flexible, it allows me to put layer on layer exactly what I want. So here I am saying I'm doing a plotting it, I'm putting the P&L on the bar, and the color, the fill is based on the is breached. This breach is either in or out. And then I'm doing my area here. I'm doing my area of my lower, because one's above, one's below the axis. I set my colors up here for my bars, and then I just make it a bit nicer. And that's that. So this was very useful to us when we couldn't produce exactly what the regulators wanted. As it happens, back in June, and this is a great thing, what happens is that the Power BI visuals are improving all the time. So if I come over here and click on this, and I click on shapes, I can now switch this on, and now I get the effect that I wanted to beforehand, but that's only become available in June. So there are some reasons for using R. Maps is another one, and you'll see some other examples when an R visual is exactly right and you can't quite exactly do it, and a user has a very precise requirement. So that's our backtest. Backtests, I say, very important charts. They go to the regulators. If we have more than 1% of those red lines, then the regulator penalizes us in various ways. And if we have more than, say, 12 in a year, then they stop us actually trading in a particular book. So a very important chart there. Great. So if I quickly go back to the slides, let me just quite quickly do that. And we're on our slides. And so we've talked about our backtest chart, and we've talked about the R version, and there's the R code to implement it. Now I wanted to talk about some very important financial information, and I apologize for this page, this slide in advance. It's the only slide that you've got with lots of text on it. I must have had a moment of weakness when I was preparing these and thought that I wouldn't be able to get over all the background to you without the psychological crutch of this chart. But it takes, before we see the visuals, I need to spend a minute talking about the background. The EBA stands for European Banking Authority. In Europe, it's a regulator of 51 banks in the UK, 51 banks in the EU, 4 in the UK, obviously. Now that the UK is leaving the EU in 2021, this won't be the case. But what they want to do, the EBA is trying to avoid another credit crunch, another crisis that we had at kind of exactly 10 years ago now. And what they want to do is make banks hold enough capital, enough reserves, so that in the case of a serious downturn, that the banks will stay solvent and they won't have to be bailed out again. So what they do is they make banks go through an exercise every couple of years, and the last one was in 2016. They made them take their actual numbers at the end of 2015 and then project them forward 2016, 2017, 2018 under a base case, which is just kind of as we expect the economy to happen, but also under a case called the adverse scenario, which is when basically the economy tanks, share prices dive, property prices dive, bad debts go up, a worse crisis than we had 10 years ago. Now, they've got very clear definitions of that, they're not such a hand waving as I suggested. And the banks have to do this calculated scenario, and then at the end of it, they go to the 51 banks being the numbers, they collate them all together, and they present them. And what they did, as well as this year, as well as producing all sorts of official, very boring PDF documents, one for each bank, was that they produced a single visualization, which we're just going to have a look at in a minute. And they also very nicely gave the data. They gave a few CSV files and Excel files with all the data that they used to do the results. And what I've done is I've taken that data and brought it into Power BI and done a few visualizations myself. But first of all, let's have a look at the EBA visualization. I'm going to go to screen 2. And what we're looking at here is what a web page published by the EBA in 2016. And what it's doing is it's just looking at the headline numbers. Now, the headline numbers, as you can see, is in this bottom left here. And each of those is by countries. And it really shows how bad things could get. So the countries on the left here, like Norway is a really good case. It hardly changes in an economic crisis. Whereas Ireland has drops by what's called 710 basis points. Ireland is clearly the bad boy. Its banks would do very badly in a crisis. Now, the interesting thing, I will say that a good visualization is one that surprises you. And I'm not very surprised about Ireland. There's been a lot enough talk. But here we are. The second worst case is Germany. If I click on Germany, that's interesting. Most people think that German banks are very solid and Germany's economy is doing very well. What's going on here? And what I can do is I can come in and I can filter, perhaps. I can filter on this data. I hope I can filter on this data. Let's have a quick look. And I'm going to filter on Germany, and I'm going to have a look at banks. And what it shows me is that, are we filtering on banks? Let me just filter on Germany there. Let me just try that one again. If I filter on Germany, there we go. And we can see that, and now we're looking here at each of the banks within Germany. And we see that the worst possible bank is this bank called NRW, which bank based in Dublin, which drops a massive 742 basis points from 2015 to the adverse scenario in 2018. Now, my problem with this visual is that it's only one visual. It only shows about 2% of the data. There's so much more data available there, and it takes you so far, but you can't now explain anymore. So what I did is, as they brought the data, they made the data available, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my screen 1. Let me just go to screen 2. Sorry. Right. Lovely. And what I've done here is, we're looking at a Power BI visualization. What I've done here is simply recreate the Power BI visualization that you just saw with the EBA without all the text. I didn't think the text added anything, and besides, you can put it in tooltips. But again, it's got exactly the same thing. In fact, I've done it here on the left. Ireland is the worst case, and Germany is the second worst case. And if we have a look at Germany, we see this bank, NRW Bank, which is the worst bank in Germany. But as I say, one visual never tells the whole story. And I think this is a more useful visual that we're seeing now. And what we're looking at is each circle represents a bank. There's 51 circles. You can see HSBC. It's absolutely gigantic bank. It's twice as big as even Barclays or something like that. So what we've got on this one is we've got basically something called RWA on the x-axis. That's roughly equivalent to the size of the bank. It's slightly weighted by if you've got more, the bank is holding riskier assets. It's slightly bigger. On the y-axis, what we've got here is we've got something called the capital. That is the money that the bank holds in shareholders' funds, and it's the money that it can lose without affecting the depositors. So what we'd really like to see is we'd really like to see banks up here. If I was a regulator, I'd like to see banks which are strong. They have a lot of in the top right area, they'd have a lot of capital, and they're also small. So in the unlikely event that a strong bank did fail, it wouldn't matter too much because it's not too big to fail. The problems comes when you have banks that would be over here in the bottom right. That would be a big, weak bank, too big to fail, and it would cascade its effect through the system if it did fail. And one thing we noticed, we talked about this thing called NRW Bank, which seemed to be the problem case, and yet here we see it as a strong bank. A small, strong bank. So what's going on? And then let's have a look at another thing. Before I go on a bit, what happens is that if we have, there's a key measure, and that measure is basically the y-axis divided by the x-axis, strength over size. It's called the CET1 ratio. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at that ratio now and against all the banks. Again, so what we've got here is on the y-axis, we've got the ratio, and on the x-axis we've got size again, and you can see most of the banks are hovering above between the 10 and the 15% mark, and this bank NRW is up here about 45%, and this is the actual case that we had in 2015. And now I'm going to go and put 2018 in black, and you can see NRW up here because it's on its own, and it has dropped, but it's dropped from outstanding to excellent. So it's not the story that we saw first of all, and we don't really have to worry about NRW Bank. I mean, we probably want to have a look at banks over here in this area, like BNP Paribas, which are just hovering over the line. And in fact, it's quite interesting that actually I tell a lie because I went to the 2016 base case. Let me go to the 2018 adverse case. So that's going from the green 2015 actual to the red, and you can see that it's quite a drop. And you can see, but we don't need to worry about NRW. And again, what we've got is, one visual never does it. And with Power BI, the nice thing is that once we've got our data set, we can create lots of lovely visuals. Here's one using the new data bars. And this is a nice parochial view. We're looking at two of the banks here, HSBC, and we're looking at Lloyd's, Barclays, and RBS, I'll just bring RBS in, and an RBS, as you can see, RBS came for a lot of stick in the UK because it kind of, the fall of grace was the worst of all the 4 UK banks. It started off being the strongest at 15.5%, and it finished off being the worst at about 8%. So, and just one other thing to point out about this data set, here is the actual data map, and this is the data set in its entirety. There's actually 1 million rows there, and if you want to play with experiment with a financial data set, this is a really good one. It's small enough to spend a few days to experiment, and you've got to make some important design decisions, but it's not large enough. It's got 1 million data rows. There's no performance implications. It's a very lovely kind of case study, not just implementation, but also design of your visuals, design of your fact tables, of your DAX, and so on. So that's our EBA, and I say let me now quickly go back to my slides. Let me go to. Okay, lovely. So I'm just going through my emergency slides. If the demo gods decided not to be too nice to me, then these are, but we've basically seen these. Let me just go. And there we talked about the data model. One thing to say is, I, like many people, I'm DAX challenged. I find it sometimes quite difficult. But one of the nice things about DAX is here what we can do is we can build up our DAX calculations. So the number that we've been talking about, this headline number, is here at the very bottom of this, the ratio adverse impact. And that you can see it's a 2018 value less the 2015 value, and you can see that the 2018 value is basically a ratio that's filtered on an outcome key. This outcome key is basically this is an outcome for 2018 adverse, that's 700, and that CET1 ratio is capital over RWA, the y-axis over the x-axis that is described about, and then here's how we calculate the capital and the RWA. So you can build your DAX step by step in quite simple DAX calculations and come to some powerful stuff. Okay, and we talked about these visuals, and also I haven't showed you, I was going to, but as well as that, here are some visuals that I produced using our visuals and I displayed. These are more regulator views, looking at each dot on the left-hand side there represents a bank, and we can see how it changes, the kind of overview between 2015 on the top to 2018 adverse in the middle. I won't talk so much about this slope chart. The next one I want to talk about is a very recent project that we did for the program managers of a large project. And what the program managers, they have a multi-million-pound project stretching over 3 years. They have 2,000 activities and over several principles. Many of you, if you look on the left-hand side, look at those principles, might recognize those principles. There's a particular set of financial regulation called Risk and Data Aggregation and Reporting. Again, the regulators have said that they had some problems, again, 10 years ago, when they wanted banks, during the credit crisis, they couldn't get good information, timely information out of the banks about their positions, so it was hard to manage the credit crisis. What they're doing now is forcing banks to make sure that they're able to report on their positions in a timely, clear, comprehensive way. And so they've created a regulation, and they've produced these principles here to do with data aggregation reporting. Reports ought to have to be complete, they have to be accurate, they have to be easy to understand, and so on. There's 11 of them. And that's generated in all the banks a huge volume of work, and in this particular bank over 3 years, 2016, 2017 and 2018. And the program managers running those activities have about 2,000 activities, and they usually have a Gantt chart, which is a kind of bar going from the start to the finish with just a few milestones on it. And that's good, but they also wanted to get a kind of real view of where the crunch points were. And so what we did is we created this thing for them. Again, we took the data and we visualized, basically the data has a milestone, the milestone has a kind of weighting, which is its importance. Each circle there represents a milestone. The size of the milestone is in parallel, is in proportion to its weighting. The status of the milestone is the color. You can see we've got a little dot. This was as of June 2017, that vertical line. Things that have milestones that have been completed are in blue. Milestones that are not yet complete or active are in green. Those that are active and are historic before today are in red because they're basically overdue. So this was I mean, the project managers really liked this chart. It helped them see the data in a way that they hadn't seen it before. They were able to ask questions that, well, there are certain of the guidelines which have a lot more work going on. So data architecture and infrastructure seems to be a very busy guideline, where not much going on in frequency and distribution, not much effort, not much work, and that came out quite a lot. And also we can see, you know, that there are a few red ones which are quite a long way in the past. What's going on there? We can, you know, maybe highlight on those. And yet there are some blue, there are some things that we've completed well ahead of time. So on whole, we can say that just looking at this, we're halfway through the project and, you know, progress is roughly on track. So that's a chart. Again, what we've done is we've used R to build it. We've used the same sort of ggplot or visual as I showed you for the backtest. We've used a couple of nice features of R, which we did this in R rather than Power BI. The first thing is that Power BI sometimes has problems plotting lots of more than 1,000 items. This is about 2,000, so we're able to plot those. We're also used a nice R feature where we've kind of jittered everything along each line. Is not exactly on the line, it's randomly moved by the y-axis, so we can still see which activity belongs to which guideline, but they've been moved a bit, and that really helps us to see when there's a large area of this overplotting. So we can see, for example, that people in the data architecture and IT infrastructure team are going to have an awful Christmas because there's an awful bulge of activities that are happening just in December 2017, and so on. And we can see where the crunch points are. Good. So that's that particular visual. Let's okay. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is something called RCSA, and RCSA stands for Risk and Control Self-Assessment. It's in banks have operational risks. A good example of the operational risk that affected me, not for a bank, was recently BEA, British Airways, had a problem a couple of months ago where the whole of the grounded, or somebody pulled the plug at a data center near Heathrow or near Bangalore. We're not quite sure where it was. They're being cagey about it, but as a result of that, all their planes were grounded for a weekend, and it's a massive customer frustration. Lots of people queuing up at Heathrow, and so that's an operational a risk, and banks have the same sort of risks, and they have a standard set of categories for the risks, and here they are on the x-axis: internal fraud, external fraud, and so on, these ones in blue. And each then there's 7 standard industry standard categories, and each has 3 or 4 subcategories. For example, internal fraud has unauthorized trading and bribery. There are actually a few more. For purposes, I just put a couple on because I didn't want to clutter up the chart. And this is a standard chart. What they try and do is they go through each division. In fact, in this case, I've just put 3 regions there: Europe, Asia, and America. And they go through a self-assessment with that division about what are their risks for this particular subcategory. And it's quite a formal process. But at the end of that, they'll come with a kind of classification which will be either very low, medium, or high. There's definitions about those, about impact and likelihood and things like that. But they come to those 4. And then obviously, if we have got risks in place, what we try and do is mitigate those, put controls in to reduce the likelihood, and if it happens, to reduce the impact of it happening. And therefore, for each of those risks, we put in mitigating controls, and they have effectiveness. And we can see on the right-hand side here whether they're adequate, inadequate, vulnerable, or worst of all, not controlled at all. Having applied those mitigating controls, we see on the right-hand side the risk with those controls applied, and hopefully that's looking a lot more low and medium, a lot more green and yellow than the inherent risk score. So this is a standard chart, and we want to build it and distribute it with Power BI. And so if I go to, let me just go to my screen 2, and I'll bring up my Power BI. And here we are. Let me quickly go to that. And so what I've done here in Power BI is I've created a matrix visual, which works very well. What I've done is I've got my data. I've created one of the new matrix visuals. I've put risk category and subcategory and rows. I've put the measure group, that is inherent risk or mitigating controls, on columns, and then region, and I get data in exactly the shape that I want to get, and I can use the nice drill up and drill down controls to show me that data. And that all works perfectly. One small problem with it is that there is a heat map without heat. At the moment with Power BI, I can't get put colors on these. If these were numbers and not ordinals, then I could color them, but I can't. And yet I do want to produce the color is intrinsic part of the visualization. Now, you know what I'm going to say here. I'm going to show you a wonderful R visual that does exactly that. And I've done the same as I did with Backtest. And here it is. Actually, it's not that particularly good. I can produce a visual like that, but without any of the values. Again, it's a matrix visual, or that was a matrix visual, or I can produce an R visual. But in this particular case, the R visual that I produce is not particularly good. The colors are there, and that's fine, but I'm not able to get the formatting exactly what I wanted to. However, what we did in the first place was that we if I quickly go to it, is that I showed you a mock-up in Excel. And if I can quickly go to my dashboards, let me have a look. My dashboards workbooks, here we go. And the good thing about Power BI is that I can, as well as loading, publishing Power BI reports, I can also publish Excel dashboards. And if that Excel dashboard is on a OneDrive for Business, it can be data-driven. So in this case, Excel is the most useful thing to produce exactly the visual that I want, and we can here produce it in Excel, and here you can see it in my Power BI service, and a beautiful visual which I think is much clearer than both the matrix visual or the R visual that I showed. So in certain circumstances, our old faithful Excel comes and is useful, and very good it is too. So let me just go and go back into sharing, and I'm going to go back to my slides. So we've seen RCSA, and we've done a demo of the matrix, the heat map without heat, the R visual, which has got the colors but doesn't quite cut it in layout terms, and finally the beautiful Excel visualization, which is exactly what the users want and can be distributed with Power BI as well. The last one, my last example is, as I say, a famous one. Rosling sadly died last year, but a hero of mine made data and statistics exciting, but also did amazing work in health. And he produced a TED Talk, which was a beautiful visual, and I've implemented it in Power BI. And let me just go to that. So if I just bring that down and just go to my particular visual and go to my screen 2. Lovely. And what he did, if I come to this, is that, lovely, let's start there. He gave a talk where he showed that he showed a custom visual like this, and each circle here represents a country. We have a timeline. You can see 1920, and I'm rapidly going through the decades, but he did it more slowly over 4 minutes. And what we've got is we've got an x-axis, which is wealth. In fact, I would call it escape from poverty, because it's a log axis. And so here we've got $100. At the left-hand side, we've got $100 a year. On the right-hand side, we've got really wealthy nations at 100,000. So that's a factor of 1,000 over there. On the y-axis, we've got lifespan in years, going from 30 years, I didn't start off at 0, to 90 years. And then if we run it, we kind of play all these countries from 1800, and what we see is that basically in the 1800s, people were dying in their mid-30s, and on average about $1,000 a year, very subsistence leveled. And what's interesting to me is how the change has really been in the last 50 years. And we can look at individual countries. That's probably Luxembourg, where you have a massive income and a really good life expectancy. And obviously this one is probably China, and China takes a different path. First of all, everybody starts living longer, and then everybody starts getting wealthier. And then there are, you know, each country, for example, Liberia has a very different story and an unfortunate story to tell, and we can look at that. But generally, you know, the story is of the last 200 years, unprecedented improvements in lifespan, unprecedented improvements, and, you know, especially the last 15 years, escape from severe poverty. And we can build this beautiful chart in Power BI very easily. I'm using a standard scatter chart, as you can see. I've got a data set called population statistics, and all I simply do is the population statistics has got a country, and then for each of the measures, income, life expectancy, population, the size of the country is equal to the population. We put the income on the x-axis, and obviously we just say it's basically make it a log axis. Where is that? Somewhere down here. Yeah, it's a log axis. There you go. And we put life expectancy on the y-axis, population on the size, country on the details, so each country is a different chart, is a different circle, and year on the play-axis. And we can do that in 10 minutes. The interesting thing here is how we get to that data, because that data, to do that so nicely, is we've got to have a data set which is very clean. It's got to have a row for every country, for every year from 1800 to 2015 or whenever it is the final, and it's got to have a value for life expectancy, population, and income. The problem is, if the data we've got, unfortunately, isn't like that. I've gone to Hans Rosling's Gapminder Foundation, and they've produced some very nice data. What I'm doing here is I'm showing you the data for the population. There was a data for population, one for life expectancy, one for income. And we're looking at the data as it is raw data. All I've done here at the stage is pointed it to the Excel spreadsheet. And we can see we've got a row for every country. We can see that we've got a column for every year. And we can see that in the first few years that it's a column for every decade. And then it becomes, after a while, it becomes a column for every year. And we've got some nulls in it. So we've got a few problems there, and it's in the wrong shape. And we've got 3 data sets rather than the 1. But with the power of the query editor, we can correct all these issues. The first thing that we've got to do is basically put this into a proper shape. And really what we want is we want to unpivot the columns like that, so that the data is in a tidy shape. So they've got a row for country and a row for the year. But we've still got, going from 1800 to 1810, we still need those years from 1801 to 1809 for our visualization to work. So what we can do is we can create a data set, and this is called country year cross, that basically has 2 rows, and it's got a row for every country for every year. And then what we can do is we can come back to we can create a population full, We can start off with our data set, which is our country year cross, and then we can merge in our population and expand it. And you can see we've got now we've got the data including 1801, 1802. We've got the rows, but not the values. So what we can do now is we can pivot it. So now we've got the ability, we've got all our countries on our columns again. And then what we can say is we can say, let's just fill down. And now what we've done, we've taken taken the 1800 number, and where it's null, we've filled 1801 to 1809 with 1800 number. We've filled 1811 to 1819 with the 1810 number. And now we've got data, we've got our data, but again, it's in the wrong shape, so we have to unpivot it back. So now we've got our data for our population, a row for every year in every country. We do the same for our life expectancy. We do the same for our income, and then we bring them all together in something called population statistics. And again, we start off with that, and we merge in our income, we merge in our population, we merge in our life expectancy, and we put the region, if I'd wanted to show it by region as well, if I'd want to have region by color. So we've got our data set. And so what I'm trying to show here is that the power of this is all in the query editor, by being able to take several data sets, by being able to do several steps on each of them and then merge them all together. I'll just close that. And we've been able to do that, and that's very nice. Just one quick aside to that, you notice that we've got something called population statistics and population statistics R. And the population statistics R just looks exactly the same than this, that is. And what I've also done here is, if I go back to edit queries, we'll see that there were two queries in there, one called population statistics R, and that's got very fewer steps. And if I just click on the source and show you that, what I've done here is I've just created exactly the same logic, but this time I've written it in R. So now, and that's really great because R can be a script. R is really well integrated into Power BI as a visual, as we've just shown, but also we can use an R script as a data source. And here I'm doing it. So now we have a high quality problem. We can choose to do our data preparation in the query editor, or we can choose to do it in as an R source. So let me close and apply that. Good. I've just got a couple of minutes left, and what I'll do is I just want to tell you about a sneak preview of what I'm going to be talking about in 6 days' time. And what we're going to be looking at there, so far today we've talked about really hard quantitative numeric information and visualizing that, but much more information is now coming in terms of text. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at some financial reports, in this case the corporate responsibility reports of a large Swiss bank, and we've got 7 years worth of reports, and we're going to be doing text analysis to see what we can infer about the preoccupations and the concerns of the senior management in the bank and how they change over time. So we'll be visualizing things like this, which is showing the frequencies of charts. We'll be looking at, if we're interested in some particular hot words of charts, we'll be looking at those and how important they are and how they change. We'll be looking at specific words that appear in specific reports and seeing how 2016 varies from 2015. We'll be doing a kind of analysis of the acronyms of the bank and seeing that bankers like their acronyms as much as IT people. We'll be doing we'll be looking at not just single words, but we'll be looking at double words here, called bigrams, and then we'll be looking at those and producing visuals of the kind of a network graph of those bigrams, which are the most important ones. And then we'll be having a look at some very interesting word charts that show us the evolution of what happens over time to the corporate reports and how they move from, well, I won't tell you, you just have to tune in next week to hear about that. Finally, just to say, if you're London Business Analytics Group, there's the link to that. If you just Google Meetup London Business Analytics Group, do come and join us if you're in London or passing through. and the oh, that's a picture of me, and as I say, all the visuals, all our previous talks, including this is something that we did a couple of days ago. We did a hands-on Power BI workshop, are on that Skills Matter chart. So if I quickly go back to my slides, and so we talked about Hans and his wonderful charts, how the data isn't perfect, and how we can sort out all those problems with the query editor. Right, and as I say, I mentioned on 27th is the BA Marathon when I'm talking about text analytics, and really just to say thank you very much. Just a cheeky plug, if any of you in London, I'm running an R course in a couple of weeks, a 2-day introduction to R course. Apart from that, the links to a lot of the examples I've talked are there, and there's a pointer to a GitHub where you can download some of this stuff if you want to. And email me, mark.wilcock@zomlex.co.uk. I always answer all the emails, very interested in what you have to say. And so I'll say thank you very much and hand it over, Dan, for any questions.
All right. Wow. Thank you so much, Mark. That was a lot of material you covered. Very good examples, and even pulling up the Excel too. Nice. So yeah, we do have some questions here. So the first one goes back to the Hans Rosling chart. Currently, you had that broken out by year. Would it be possible if someone wanted to break that out by month instead of just year? Could they use that on the play axes?
Obviously not with this data set, because this data set doesn't have months in it. But yes, I mean the play axis, if you've got data on a monthly basis, there's no reason why you shouldn't put month on your play axis. You'd probably have to put a month number. You'd have your month name, which is showed, and your month number, because it needs to know that January is 1 and December is 12. I have tried that, but I see no reason why it shouldn't work.
Sure, that makes sense. So as long as it's available in the data, and most likely that country data isn't generated on a monthly basis. So it's, in this case, it's done on a yearly basis. So okay. Another one, someone is interested in learning R. Do you have any suggestions as far as like a book that they might want to check out just to get an introduction to
Yeah,
R,
absolutely.
or maybe some courses?
Absolutely. There's a really good book, and it's written by Hadley Wickham. It's called R for Data Science, and it's available free online. The website is r4ds.had.co.nz or something. But if you Google R for Data Science, you can buy the book, or the electronic version is free. Fantastic, really well written, obviously with a data science perspective, and really well explained. Lots of good examples, lots of good code, and I'd really recommend it. Courses, Microsoft has a course in R, and there is also the Data Camp courses. They're fantastic short courses. I think there's about $25 a month subscription, but they are, I think, really well taught, and they have from introduction to R all the way through to quite sophisticated courses in there.
And in regards to R, someone was wondering, is there any good references for the ggplot visualizations?
Yes. What I would suggest is I will send out the visuals I just showed for the text analytics. They make, as you can probably notice, make extensive use of good ggplot visualizations, and the R code is in a GitHub repository, and I will, if I send it to you, we can send it out to all people afterwards. It's github.com /Mark Wilcock, I think, and then there's a GitHub repository there, and you can just download that R code. That's the best way to look at that is by examples, and those are a lot of good examples. There's also a chapter in the book as well for data science about ggplot. In fact, it's almost the very first chapter. Bring your data in and then visualize it.
All right, great, thank you. Okay, one more here. Someone is wondering, at the beginning of the presentation, you were talking about the group that you run there, and they were wondering, can the presenter identify where to access the talks from your group that you run?
Yes. So I'll very quickly show you. If you want to see the talks on my screen too, and if you go to skillsmatter.com, you should be seeing it up there, skillsmatter.com, and here we go, beginners handle workshop, and if you go to there, there's a group there called London Business Analytics Group, and it will show you, hold on, let's have a quick look, let's go back to the London Business Analytics Group, here you are, and on there it has got what's coming up next, but also past events. So if I click on past events, we've got quite a lot of events up there, and you can see them scrolling through.
Oh,
so,
outstanding.
And the recordings are really good. I really recommend this one, Dark Data by Mark Whitehorn. It's a fantastic talk, and the one by Harvinder here as well. So yes, and fantastic recordings. They have a great AV team, and the recordings are top-notch, high quality.
Awesome. And just a reminder, everyone, that this presentation was recorded. We will get that uploaded to our YouTube channel either later today or tomorrow for sure. And Mark will also be making his presentation slides available to us so that we can post those on the event site on the handout section. Mark, I want to thank you again for your time. Outstanding material. Thanks for sharing with our community.
It's been a pleasure.
Very helpful. And good luck next week, Mark, on your presentation
Thank you very much.
in the BA Marathon. Looking forward to that.
Great.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining. And remember, fill out the survey and let us know if you'd be interested in a PASS comp or not. If you're available, haven't registered yet, and would love to go to the conference, let us know. We'll be doing a random drawing for that, and we'll also be doing the random drawing for the Amazon gift cards. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks.